Good morning, everyone. Joe here again from MU 180 at Millersville University. Once again here Saturday morning, just trying to give you a different perspective on the learning process and how to be more successful when it comes to test taking. This week in class, I made you a promise, and that was that I could potentially have you recoup 6 to 10 points per test using this strategy. This strategy is designed for the individual who does understand the material but is having difficulty scoring on tests. If you're an individual who has difficulty understanding the material, then it's important for you to realize that this strategy is not designed for that. If you have difficulty understanding, you need to step outside of yourself and pull in a classmate, a roommate, a tutor, or your professor to give you additional perspective on the information to hopefully have you better understand it. So we started out in the classroom this week by asking students to share with me what some of their frustrations were when it came to test taking, and this is what they came up with. The diagram on the right is simply a filing cabinet that I'm going to use as a prompt to better understand the remembering process. So students in class this week asked some really good questions anonymously in class. For example, why do I think I understand the material, but I don't seem to be able to score well on the test? Okay, great question. We're going to get to that. The other question was similar, tapping into the same issue. How is it that I seem to remember information after the test is over and have trouble locating it, so to speak, during the test? And the third question, or primarily a statement taken from my experience when students would come into my office and start out by saying, I didn't do well on the test, I'm a poor test taker, and I just seem to blank out on tests. Okay, so this strategy is simply designed to have a student look at the way they're preparing for the test compared to another student, let's say, who is using this strategy. So let's first talk about this filing cabinet. We're going to use it and basically consider this student number 1, and student number 1 has to read chapter 2 to take a test, and then we have student number 2, and they're also reading chapter 2 to take the same test. Okay? So we'll first start out by really looking at the difference in two types of filing systems. The first student is simply reading the textbook. And one of the things I found out from the class was that most students don't have a strategy when they go into a textbook. They just, quote, start to read. Okay, the second student is going to use a strategy. But before we go to that, let's talk about a filing cabinet or a filing system. Inside a filing cabinet, a good filing cabinet, an organized filing cabinet, you will find, how's this filing cabinet organized? You will find dividers or separators. You will typically find folders or files. And then you will also find papers, information, or documents. And while you may not have a physical filing cabinet in your dorm room or at home, if you look on the desktop, there are icons on there that are folders. And more often than not, when you have multiple documents that are like in some fashion or similar, that you will drag and drop them into a folder. It's the same principle. So now the question is, how are you storing material? So we have these two students. Student number 1 reads chapter 2 and simply puts the information in the folder. The second student is going to use a very, very simple technique. That is what I'm calling an outlining strategy. Many of you have had to outline things before. Oftentimes it was in high school. Sometimes it was seen as busy work for a substitute teacher. But if the outlining strategy was presented to you as a strategy, perhaps you would look at it somewhat differently. This strategy is important because the difference between high school and college tests, even before we talk about the difficulty level, One of the challenges for students in college tests is that they are now studying higher volumes of more complex material that they have to keep in their head for a longer period of time. In high school, you potentially were tested every 3 to 5 days in some way, shape, or form in your high school classes. You would get a quiz or a test or a prompt or something that kept you on track. In college, it's totally different. Here we are just going into the 5th week of the semester, and some of you have not had your first test yet. Okay, so how does this filing cabinet work? So let's take this second student, and as they're reading the same chapter as the first student, they're outlining the chapter. Okay? So in effect, what they're doing is that they're taking the information that's in the chapter, organizing it, putting it into smaller chunks, and then looking at larger headings that information actually is part of. So for all intents and purposes, the information for student number 2, chapter 2, is more organized. Okay? This student did not have a strategy. They're not outlining. They may even be highlighting, but that's not enough. Highlighting does not organize the material. So now I have these 2 students going and taking the test. Okay? So here we are, test day. Which student is able to find the information more quickly? And of course the answer is student number 2, who organized the information while they were studying. So this student is actually able to get to the material more quickly. The second thing is who gets to the information more accurately. Okay? So it's a combination of speed and accuracy, and when you store the information in an organized fashion before the test, you can access it more quickly and more accurately. The third, and certainly the comment I'm about to make, has to do with test taking and blanking out, because some students experience test anxiety during this time. Test anxiety for student number 1 is a function of knowing that they understood the material, they just can't find it. And the reason they can't find it, unlike student number 2, is because student number 2 took the time to organize the material by doing an outline. Okay? That outline has a number of advantages, and this student has a number of advantages over the student who just read the material. Again, more easily able to find it, more accurate in the search process, and less stress during the test. Stress causes this blank out issue, and oftentimes when we're in a rush to try to find information, okay, that's when we end up losing traction trying to find the information in our head and actually experience a whiteout. We can't find the information. We normally call it, or the common language is, that I blanked out on the test. But the reality was you were looking for the material, you lost traction, and then basically you were looking around in your head, and that's where the blank out occurs. If you have a system that helps you find the information, you are certainly much more likely to experience less stress and find that information in a shorter period of time. Okay? Some very simple reasons that outlining works is that it gives you the big picture of the chapter and how things fit together. It also allows you to create a product. A lot of students walk away from the reading experience and they hear themselves say, how am I going to remember all this? How am I going to keep all this in my head? Well, if you're creating a product, a very simple product, not a content outline, but just a topic outline that allows you to see the topics and then potentially how they fit together. It also helps you break the material down, and certainly using a strategy slows you down. And for the most part, in my experience with students, when they don't use a strategy, are oftentimes reading minimally 10 to 15% faster than they should. Okay? So in that process, you're accelerating your reading speed to get through the material, and consequently, even though you may have understood it, you didn't store it well, so you can't find it during a test. And that is the crux of this video, that the student who's having difficulty locating information simply needs to slow down a bit, use an outline or a system that will allow you to walk away from the reading experience with something in your hand. You don't have to hold it all in your head. You now have an outline. And I certainly have to put a plug in very simply for something I mentioned earlier when it came to time management and managing your materials for this semester. Find that 1 hour block of time between breakfast and lunch. Find that 1 hour block of time between lunch and dinner, just for reading purposes. Use a strategy that helps you organize the material in smaller chunks, and certainly things will go your way. Again, these strategies that come to you are not just my strategies. They're from multiple years of experience working with dozens of students who tell me what works. So this works. Give it a try. And like I always say, it works if you work it. Keep on working it.